Okay, so I've shared some pictures today for the new material, but before we do that, let's address the brass kettle that we did from last time, the yellow metal. Um, I'll just share the image one more time. This is how far we've come, and this is how we have to finish it. So we have created the uh, light colors and the mid-tones and the highlights, block the highlights for our picture. And we will proceed to add darker tones, shades and shadows, and give more definition, thereby creating more contrast. So the colors we use are pretty much the same, mostly gamboge, yellow ochre, and then we'll also add in a few more colors like burnt umber. And to darken burnt umber, we will go into some blues like cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and black. So this seems a very unusual choice when we are painting yellow metals. But often, in order to darken a color, it works better if you use contrasting color than just go for black directly. So I am moving now to the spout and working with pretty much the same kind of coloring. So this will be a mix of gamboge and yellow ochre. And I'm going to paint the bottom part in this shade. So one standard, a few instructions when you're working with a palette. Generally, don't wash your palette. Keep all your colors available. And if you feel you need a clean section, just wipe away with a wet rag. And even then, if you feel that there are some colors you think you can use, keep those active so that you can pull them in to create a subtle shade difference. Now, with watercolor, it often happens that you can, whatever you are making will be a combination of various shades and various colors. And from within that one area also, it will vary. So it always helps to have a smattering of shades all around your palette, which you can dab into to quickly change the color. That's the whole purpose of having cake shades rather than tubes, to match color very easily. Now, this particular topic we've spent a week away from. Oh my God. So we won't know. It's very easy to forget how you match the colors or mix the colors. So in this case, you can take a separate sheet of paper and do a color matching exercise. You can make a new color, sample it out, and see whether the color is matching. So a little more yellow gamboge than yellow ochre would keep the shades aligned. Now, in the event that you don't manage to match the shades, it's not the end of the world. We can create, recreate the shade separately, or put a wash all over to match the shade again. So here again, now I'm going to first put a little layer of mostly yellow ochre, and then wash the brush and use the second color we made right below it. Wash the brush, wipe it, and then almost on a diagonal mix it so that there's a triangular area over here which is slightly lighter. All our shades, all our colors will become even lighter, and we can lighter than what we see them go in as. I'm extending some of the yellow ochre up into the spout as well. So there's a tiny dark patch in between these two. Now here there's a very interesting shape, almost a teardrop shape, an inverse teardrop shape or a raindrop shape, which is the highlight. You can turn the book around, mix a slightly deeper yellow ochre color and paint in the opposite direction. Now here it won't matter too much because we have to come back into this space and make it darker. Now I'm not referring to whatever technique we used last time, because it's not important that you, or let me put it the other way around. There are many ways in which you can paint or draw or arrive at a particular result without having to repeat that same technique. So when you look at a reference image that you want to recreate, every time you can make up a fresh technique to come up with solutions for that illustration. The reason I'm saying that to you is because if you work with only prescribed techniques, then you won't be open or ready enough to take on challenges and experiment yourself and figure out for yourself how you can arrive at almost the same kind of result. So while there are a few things about technique that are important, like if I may make a reference to last class, I have a feeling that we painted the whole section in the first color and then went over it with the shadow. But this time we've treated the two separately and differently. And it really doesn't matter if one technique is better than the other, or sorry, it doesn't matter how we go about it, because one technique is not better than the other. Each technique is good as long as the result is met. So the point I'm trying to make is when you encounter a topic that you want to experiment with or you want to illustrate, look at it objectively and do not try to remember or memorize a technique. Don't try to memorize colors or color mixing. When I give you the colors to use, it's only because you may be unfamiliar with the palette right now, and it helps to choose a starting point. But trust your eyes, trust your judgment, and you should be able to create the same kind, the shade that you see in the reference image. And that is the important part. Now here again, I will start from the top. This is the same gamboge and yellow ochre mix. Spread it with water so that it becomes a little lighter towards the middle. Now, I'm using this color on the rim in such a way that I paint from the sides towards the center, and the center I leave a section blank, unpainted, because all these highlights will come in a row. We can see them in a row. Now for the handle, I prefer to make the texture that we are about to paint in structurally create that texture before we paint it. So obviously over here we can see that there is some kind of winding done. Some probably a piece of cane or wood that has been wound on top. We might be tempted to just make a U shape and just draw vertical lines. And that is fine if we are making a graphic. If we want to make it more realistic, we need to make, I'm blowing up the size so you can see the lines better. You need to make each individual shape like this, right from the bottom with rounded edges on the top and the sides. And then on the left, as it goes, as it is wound to the left, make it look like it is an individual piece of cane that is being tied up. When it comes towards the sides, as it comes into the vertical section or the turn over here, these curves will become tighter. You can see that. So you can imagine that the main metal handle is slightly narrow and our winding goes a little around it, just a little bit around it. It can't be the same size. If you make it the same size, this will look like a mistake. If this is the size of your handle, you can't make it the same size. It has to go a little beyond that, and then that should be fine. So take the trouble to draw a few of these lines, and in some places, you might also see that there are bumps. So oftentimes when uh, something like this is wound, it's wound from one side. And as you wind it, you overlap the tail end. So you get a little bump every time a new piece of cane would go over the old piece of cane. So you might see it, but if you don't see it, you can just make the shape like this. Make it very light. We are going to paint over it, but you should be able to see these lines even underneath the painting. Stop where the cane starts narrowing. In a way, this also is like a doodle texture. Bring both sides to the same distance from the top or the bottom, and then start reducing the width of that. Now, when we paint over this, even if we don't make the detail in dark, this will be seen from the bottom and make the illustration look more convincing. There are a few highlights in these places, just at the joint over here. So leave those and paint the entire handle in this color. Now, when we are painting this, leave some section at the base as a highlight, just over here, because that part is reflecting the highlight from the lid. And we will leave a little highlights just at the top end of the cane handle. Do make marks in between, because it's not a flat line. Each of those individual sections is reflecting a little bit of light. So these details are important. The same thing goes for the knob. Leave the highlights in between by making the lines in those sections. Everyone's doing okay? All right, I'll just give you a few minutes here. Now let's make the deeper color using a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of burnt umber in the same colors. So I'm adding, this was the original color. I'm adding burnt umber and yellow ochre to a little to the left. Another tip for color mixing is not to make one large puddle of the color that you're trying to make or the shade that you're trying to make. If I were to add a little more gamboge, say, to the existing color, instead of putting it right in the center, like we do when we're cooking, you put salt in the entire food. Don't do that. Put the color on the edge, because that way you can just get a little shade difference or a tonal difference from the original color. Otherwise, you just have to keep mending that entire puddle of color by putting a lighter shade, a darker shade, a different shade. Better than that, always work on the side. So you always have the original color to keep adjusting. Now change the brush to a smaller size. I was using a number 6 earlier, and I've changed to a number 4. Because this will help you control the amount of medium that you have in your brush. And this time round, I am placing more color along the base of the round part of the lid. I've made this section, and now I'm just going to, with a damp brush, spread it around. The same color will come in a smaller area everywhere that we have made the other color. So paint something else, paint something less. And also in a particular shape along the handle. So we leave a little section on the left and right, then paint almost the entire handle more to the center and right. Now remember, when you're painting this, paint with brief strokes. Don't go over and over the same area again and again, because that will dislodge the colors from the base. One common mistake that all beginners make when we start off with watercolor is to treat watercolor like color pencil illustration or pencil sketching, where we feel that the more we work the area, the more color is going to be deposited. But unfortunately, that's not how watercolor works. It works best if you can just make a quick application, spread and stain the paper, and then allow the color to dry. If you want to make any adjustment, get a second layer working or a third layer and rework that tactic. I'm using the same deep color now on the spout, painting slightly towards the center, leaving a little gap, spreading the color in the middle, and moving briskly. Now, if I want to spread this further, I have wiped the brush, I have washed it, wiped it, and I'm going to run the damp brush along the edge very briefly so that I spread the existing color in such a way that it leaves behind a light mark. If you ever see watercolor artists' work, you'll notice how they, unlike popular perception, they don't really sit and keep going over and over and over an area. They'll stare at one area for a long time and then they'll come and make one mark or two marks or just a quick flick of the brush. And it almost seems like they are toying with you. Why are they not painting more than they are doing right now? That seems to be the common question every time, at least as a beginner when you're watching watercolor artists. And in the start of the painting, they just take so much paint and they're just washing the paper with so much. You feel, again, whether they are, that technique is even more mysterious. Now I'm mixing a little bit of cobalt blue to my burnt umber. The burnt umber was also mixed in the gamboge and yellow ochre mixture. And I'm taking this deep brown color and painting the handle in this manner. I want you to just see this. The space over there is so limited that if we try to paint everything, we might fail. We have a nice base tone going. And I know that this might come as a very intricate detail. So for those of you who don't like detailed work, you can repeat the same process that we did for the handle by using just a deep brown shade. If you can paint it a little away from or within the yellow, that'll be great. So this is, I guess, a very nerdy way of going about it. And since we are spending so much time on making the brass pot looks so realistic. I think it might help to do this. So I'm going to continue this way, but now I need to also fill this space up. So I'm going to take a little less paint and paint a little bit from the top and a little bit in the middle. And I'm making these vertical strokes instead of just horizontal strokes throughout, because at a very tiny level, these vertical strokes are all going to create the illusion of a frayed edge on both sides, which imitates the kind of highlight or the edges of the highlight that will fall on a material like that. So automatically you will see that we have created a highlight. And once this is done, you can deepen this color with a mix of, again, yellow, cobalt blue and burnt umber, and repeat the process in an even smaller area. Maybe just the bottom. So this is how we create more dimension, more depth in the picture. And at this point, with the darker shade, you can even out the edges. The shape that I have made obviously looks like an exaggerated shape of the handle. It's not this pronounced. Yes. So I'm going to give you the breakup of these colors. You have gamboge and what am I saying gamboge again and again? Burnt umber and cobalt blue, shade 1, because this will also have gamboge and yellow ochre, and this is shade 2, which is the darker shade. That's minus the yellow ochre and gamboge. So this thing will take time, and give it the time necessary.
Aditi, this before the very dark color, it would have worked for corn kernels.
Oh yeah, it would have.
Bhutta, yeah.
Yeah.
How to paint a bhutta. Now I know.
Okay, I'm not going to finish this whole thing because this will take a lot of time. So we can move on to the rest of the object and keep now making more and more darker shades. So I wanted to show you this one technique that I use with a very fine brush. It's not generally advised for watercolor painting. Mostly you are supposed to make broad strokes. So I will demonstrate the broad strokes also, and then I will show you the fine stroke work that I do just for myself, not because it's a common technique. I find better results that way. Okay, so if you can just give me your attention for a little bit, I want to show you the difference between the two. So if I were to continue in this same vein, I would make strokes like these. I would make broad strokes in, again, going by the technique of making something in a smaller space so that you create more depth and everything starts becoming deeper and darker. But as I'm showing you, the strokes that I'm making are all simple enough. They are just one stroke here, one stroke there, and that should be it, right? But somehow I find that a little unsatisfactory. I just finish this part. And I tend to do a little extra and differently, especially when it comes to things like botanicals. So when it comes to the spout, I'm going to show you how I would do it differently. Let me finish this part. So I'm just making the color slightly deeper, simple strokes and finishing that off. I've got an awful stroke here. So I'm putting some water and I'm just going to use a clean rag to pick up that color quickly. Okay. Now, here's what I do. I take a very thin brush and very little color in this, barely visible color in the brush. So you can still see this, but I can go even lighter. And with this color, I start off, literally embark on the tedious process of filling in the shade one note at a time. We can do a combination of the two techniques. But I find this immensely satisfying because I can control the outcome almost like we would do in embroidery. You're making these darker tones like a stitch, one stitch at a time. But you don't make them too dark. And the shading bit is very much like pencil shading. It's very fine. The paint is very, very light and the brush is very dry. So you don't get that cloudy effect that you would otherwise if the brush was very wet. And in a lot of places, I have seen this kind of work done only for textural work in miniature paintings. I haven't come across watercolor artists really bothering to do such detailed painting. That's not what the medium is meant for. But I just can't help myself. So I tend to do this to get a very fine result. Now here the paint is a little wetter than I would like, but I'm making it wet right now because I want to cover a slightly larger area, making this the base, wiping the brush again, and then spreading it out. So the problem with this technique is you do need a certain amount of control in your hands. So you should know exactly where your hand is traveling. See this? Much better control. I really, really like this. And with this, you can then address every part of the illustration with I guess much easier, with much more ease than when you have to make a brief stroke and finish it off. So I suppose the difference between haiku and an essay you have enough time and enough strokes to really detail out every little bit and every nuance is taken care of. Now, when it comes to places like these, where you have a narrow rectangular part that needs to be colored, here, as we would do in shading with pencil, we do the same thing in color as well. At the base of the neck, you have this dark shade. Also, it's darker on two sides more than in the center because of this highlight. And then everywhere, the highlight has to be acknowledged. So you make thinner lines around it. And then when you come to where the lid touches the mouth of the pot, this part, try to make one smooth line that runs across. And in doing that, automatically you start creating a shadow.
क्या करेंगे आपके पास है नहीं इसको तोड़ेंगे तो देखो
Okay? And if you want, you can try my technique over here. Keep your brush very dry and first start shading in the dark sections. And keep your hand very light as well. So these are the places where people who have the habit of holding their chin or their head should keep their hand on the paper because it will give you enough anchoring and allow your hand to uh, fly on the paper. Now I haven't drawn the reflection of the knob on the lid. That's another level. We can do that also, but we won't do it for this one because it's not really important. Okay, this is a spot we can try that with a thin brush. Test out the color. Start with a mix of this burnt umber and cobalt blue and make it very light. So keep washing and wiping the brush and keep it very light. And then in a small section where you want it dark, just make a shadow like that. It's very subtle. And every successive row, as one row dries, keep adding more color. Now you have to wait for that row to dry. Otherwise, you'd just be dislodging paint from one area to the other. So with all shiny surfaces, you must remember that you identify the spots where you have contrast and highlight. It's all just about that. Faithfully representing, putting down contrast and highlight. How's it going, everyone? Any questions? Any problems that I can help you with?
I think the more I work it, the worse it becomes.
Why?
I think one needs to just leave it alone after some time.
Why? What are you
So
trying
one
to
keeps correcting, I don't know. Just
okay.
like the bottom of it that we had done earlier, na? Mine was a little darker. So, I mean, a very weird line at the bottom. So, I'm trying to do something to that.
There is a weird line there, by the way. Yeah? That is the
Yeah, there's a like a brownie thing, and then mine is slightly crooked. That's the problem.
Let it
I'll
be.
just show you. I'll just show you what it looks like.
I would
See
suggest
what-
you don't make any corrections till the picture is over. No, I think it's fine. Let it be. Yeah.
That bottom is looking on such a tilted kettle, but
Let
never
it,
mind.
let it be. Let it be. Don't correct that right now.
Okay, okay.
Correct it later if we feel the need. These things you will encounter quite frequently. Some lines look awkward at some stage, but it's important to note that at when your illustration is not finished, all these things look odd, even if they're not odd. In your case, right now it's catching the eye. But have you finished the handle bit? So the moment you finish this, there will be a dark shape that will balance on the other side.
Okay.
And that
Yeah.
changes or gives less importance to the dark shape at the base of the kettle. So
Yeah.
there's really no telling how things shift in importance.
Okay. Yeah, the top was a little wet, so now I'll do the detailing if I can.
Hmm. There's this story of the painting called the Night Watch. This is by Rembrandt, I think. It's at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And the story is really regarding the how we perceive things. That's not the story in the painting. The painting, I think, is about a rebellion where a group of people are meeting at night and they are going to uh, rebel against whatever. So it's a meeting, really. And I think the meeting is very hurriedly organized. So there's a bunch of kids also. You find that, okay, this is going to be a meeting of people regarding a rebellion. Why are there kids in that space? Why all this is important is because at the currently the way the picture is, you see that a little girl in a very flamboyant dress takes center stage and it gives a completely different meaning to the painting. It almost looks as if she is either royalty or she is part of the rebellion or this is a rebellion of the upper caste, which seems very contrary to how rebellions normally are. So what happened was that this painting was actually three times its current size. And then in some kind of tragedy, a third of the painting, one third of the painting, I think, burnt down. And in restoring it, another little part had to be removed. So if you can imagine, this is the whole painting, some of it burnt, and then they had to remove this. And what we are left with is roughly about half or maybe two-thirds of the painting. Yeah, so it was one third size bigger. So there is data about how much was burnt, how much was destroyed, and how much was restored. So unfortunately, tragedies don't happen in symmetry. So the focal point of the painting completely shifted. So while the focus was on a group of men discussing in hushed tones how the rebellion should be conducted, the presence of that little girl in the foreground was only, I guess, to highlight how the circumstances were, that this was not an organized rebellion, that there were people around, there were peasants around who were just hanging out over there, and then this was organized and people went. So, something to that effect. These are not accurate details. Please don't take my word for it. But because the focus shifted, the painting looks completely different, and the title of the painting sometimes makes no sense to the painting. So that's how much of visual art works. There are such somehow there are such balances that the eye enjoys, that if you just allow the picture to complete itself, that enjoyment of your artwork will overshadow a few details that you find are defects in your picture in the beginning. So don't do corrections till the painting is completed. At some point, if you feel the need to make an outline to your object, choose the medium toned color of the object itself. Don't make the outline as a black outline, because then your picture will look like a graphic. This is not a graphic. We're trying to make it or keep it as realistic as possible.
Kettle is beautifully shiny,
Hmm.
amazingly shiny. I think you've got very dark contrast, but not the others. I don't know. Mine are really much more area of dark than light.
But that is better. I could have gone a little darker over here and even here. I find it very difficult to make dark colors. So, my generally, I have to go over my work at least 3 times after I feel the painting is completely done. Now, after this is done, if you want to make a shadow to this, don't be tempted to make a shadow in black, because with so many colors and it looking so nice and shiny, we can make the shadow again in a blue, or at worst case scenario, even a yellow ochre or a burnt umber would be fine. So we see the shadow underneath this kettle already. It is comes very close to the foreground, and 1 second. And it's in this oval shape around the kettle first. So this kind of light where this has just come from the top will give us an oval shadow right underneath the kettle. But I find that very boring. So I will change my shadow and make it only come from the base a little to the left. And then if you want to, you can make a flattened shape of the kettle as is seen in the picture. Or you can just ignore this part and just make an oval that's about this large. And using a medium brush, I'm going to show you 2 ways of making a shadow. If you want to make a sharp, light shadow, just use a cerulean blue. Even cobalt blue should be fine. Cerulean blue gives a very bright shadow. And go over this area. Just paint a flat color. All the way till the other end of the base. And this will give you a sharp shadow. If you want to make this a little fuzzy, or let me show you a shadow that can be fuzzy also. This is our object, and this is our shadow. You can visualize like an umbra penumbra shadow. And start off with a dark shadow in the umbra region. It should be very close to the object and just below. And then using the same technique that we did earlier, wash the brush, wipe it, and then pull the color outside with a damp brush. So keep making the brush damp and making the edge fuzzy. And pull the color outward to wherever you need. So you get a much softer shadow, like a pencil shadow. And the third way now, also, if you want to intensify this shadow more, you can just make another layer of that same cerulean blue just around the base, but don't make it the same throughout. Don't make it symmetrical. Make it wider, a little far away from the edge on the left, where you have more of the shadow, and closer to the edge of the object on the opposite side. Now, since today we have, I think the time is also close to an end. We will carry on till 12:45 today, not 12:30. Is that okay with everyone? Then in that case, can I ask you to switch to the cloth today?
I wanted to know about the texture before we do that. The base, how do we do that dots? Just for fun, even if we don't do it, just how do we give that texture
Okay, let me just
at the
see.
base of the kettle?
Okay, I'll show you. Looking nice, Elaine. What is that green thing that has happened below? Brush fell? Oh, hand. Oh, how sad. Okay, the dotted texture comes from wait,
It has that hammered effect.
yeah. I'm not particularly fond of that effect, but I'll show you. So that is nothing but making those dots in strategic places with gaps in the middle. So this is very, very much like illustrating stone walls or masonry walls. I'll show you the texture just next to this. Now, if I want to show it to you on this ball, for example, I might as well paint this whole thing. So we will make a highlight at the secondary color. And now here's also something that often you will do when you start becoming comfortable with watercolor is you'll start doing a lot of wet on wet. So I'm going to put this dark color at the equator in some places so that it blends easily with the backdrop. I have just arbitrarily made these shapes based on the shapes that I see in the kettle. So it'll look like another brass shape in the same vicinity. So once this has dried, you can take the small brush and incidentally, I have a very fine brush. This is a handmade brush that I picked up in Udaipur in 2009. And this is made by hand by miniature painting artists. And it's made out of squirrel hair. My assumption is that they just borrow this hair from squirrels and no squirrels are harmed in the process. But I don't want to think anything beyond that. So the difference between these two is that there is a much more thinner, controllable tip to the squirrel hair handmade brush than to what I presume is the machine-made brush. But I'm not going to use this. I just found it yesterday. I was so delighted I had to share this. So on the dried up section, you start off with the lighter part of the medium color and start with making a shape that is a little angular. So I would make a shape that may not be like a rectangle, but will definitely have some sides. And there's a logic behind this, and that is that when that piece of metal is hammered, it flattens that edge, that side of the object. That's the whole point of creating that hammered pattern. And you just keep repeating these shapes. The more varied you can make them, the better, because even the person who is making that hammered pattern cannot control the final shape of that will emerge there beyond a point. So keep it tiny. And even in this, you will notice that there are highlights and shadows. So as you move towards the periphery, the color will change and it will become lighter. So it starts becoming lighter as it moves outward. So it's not a circle. If you make a circle, it'll start looking more polka dot. I'm making some darker
Size wise, we keep it same all through.
Yes, more or less the same. Have you seen how this is done, this work?
No, I have a utensil of it, but not, I don't know how it's made.
So Pune is a big hub for Pital, I think. And this has been a traditional art craft in Pune. So when you go to this place called Tambeali in Pune, it announces itself before you even go there, because there's these craftsmen who are hammering on metal pots. And I'm very grateful to the local authorities for having promoted this art so they can still survive if they were almost dying out. So
Where is
sorry?
Where?
This is everything is near Mandai. So I think you go to Mandai or somewhere between Mandai and Shanwarwada.
Acha, okay.
Somewhere, yeah.
Behind Vidya says
Yes,
behind.
behind Shanwarwada. So in that area, you will find it. It'll come to me exactly where it is because I have been there, and I had wanted to get one of my metal inkwells dated. So I had gone to Tambai to a fellow to see if he can tell me how old it was. And that's when I just saw them working. So they take all sorts of different containers. Okay, so going from Kasba Pet to Shanwarwada. I knew Vidya would know. And then they keep hammering with the same hammer. And depending upon which area they would do it, say the bottom area might have larger sections, so they'll hammer a little harder. And I think they would have a different hammer for maybe smaller pots. But most of those marks are made with the same hammer. And there is, I think, a good reason for it. I think it distributes heat differently. So there is a scientific reason why it's better to have hammered the pot than to just keep it plain without hammering it. So we can find out about that also.
I think maybe a duller surface usually will absorb heat better than something that just is smooth. It kind of radiates. That time you have fires of wood and coal.
Exactly, correct. So I think that there must have been some kind of scientific reason why this was preferred to having containers smooth, because I don't think this is a very I mean, the markings are not like a design alone.
No,
They
no.
tend to give a wonderful texture, that's true, but going through all that trouble in order to create texture for functional items, which are not even display items, is
The heat spreads better with the essence.
yeah,
Quite right.
yeah.
It's like having a dull baking tin
Actually,
rather than
office area is increased by
Office
hammering.
area is increased, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good reason. Yeah.
Remember,
Okay.
we had bought bottles, copper bottles, hammered drinking water bottles.
I think those are for fashion.
Yeah.
I don't
But I think it is healthier to
yeah, of course,
drink
of course.
or even
Yeah,
have
from
food
copper.
cooked in these metals rather than definitely
I
not
don't
Teflon.
I don't know about that because all the brass and copper was always tinned, na kalai inside. They didn't want that the
Dark.
food to touch it directly. Water boiling is okay, but not food.
No, I have absolutely no idea why it was better, but every home insisted on having it, and they seem to be doing fine with it. And then
Yes.
compared to the non-stick and Teflon that we have got, I doubt that more than the older
Yeah.
materials for some
No,
reason.
no, and we eat a lot of that stuff. It comes off and it's not even good.
Yeah, I don't even think we can identify what that
Good.
material is.
Don't want to light
Yeah.
your squirrel. Hopefully those guys are Bishnois and they don't kill the squirrels.
I hope so, yeah. I hope so. They just use like for hair. I don't think there's any need to kill a squirrel.
Even in Tanjore art, they use squirrel hair for the
Mm,
brushes.
Just
My
mm,
the
sir had it.
tail ones are the ones they'll take
Mm.
anyway.
I think
Those
so.
are the longest.
We can just hope. Not that we can do anything about it if it is anything else. So what to do? Okay, so there is still more that you can do with the pots, huh? You can keep adding more and more paint. So what I would recommend is try and paint other pots or other containers with highlights also. The technique is just the same. Identify the different shades in terms of layers, not just the area in which they are painted. So one base color goes over the entire area. That will be the softer light, softer color. And then you start building up with deeper and deeper and deeper tones. Where the place where you would use this most is maybe for a recipe illustration. There are very few places outside of food illustration where at least I felt the need for using or painting reflective material. Even when we are drawing, say, cars or buildings, when we draw glass on that, it does not look like reflective material like this. So that is treated again differently. So though the applications are very few, once you get this, you can get a lot of other stuff. The if I were to enumerate the important aspects in shiny material or painting or drawing shining material, is firstly to understand the vast range of contrasting tones. So you have a highlight that is zero color or tone, and then you have the darkest shadow, that's the darkest tone you can get in, and then you have the range. When we are drawing anything else, even when we're drawing flowers or fruit, or for that matter, even humans, we don't get to see this range so specifically and divided so well as we do in inanimate objects that are shiny. Once we study that, it becomes easy for you to translate this into all sorts of other objects. And I'm always aiming at doing realistic portraiture. So when we do portraiture of different kind, you will encounter sharp shadows, soft shadows, textures, and almost all the stuff that we have drawn right now in this kettle, you will encounter in the face. Like for example, the rim that we have drawn underneath the lid and between the pot, that is exactly the way you will render the eyelids. The whole pot itself you will render like you would render the skin. The spout is objects like your arm or leg, which are cylindrical and have some shape exactly like the spout of the kettle. You will render things like arms and legs, or even the digits. So there are several things over here that if you learn to see light, tone, highlight, and color, and practice rendering, when you come to portraiture, it becomes that much easier. Other than that, you might not need it much.
No, actually, just today I sent you two photographs, and now I find they're quite redundant
Okay,
because
yeah.
the satin is exactly what you taught us in this. You know, it could be a satin. This surface of the kettle
Yeah.
is very much like the satin folds on a skirt
Correct.
because I mean it's just the shading, how subtle or how this one is very contrasted, And if you didn't contrast it so much, like kind of blended it, then the satin would become satiny or rounded or something like that.
Correct. Yes.
Same kind of highlight, very
Yeah.
bright highlight. And for the canvas or for our cloth bag and all, then there's not much highlights, no?
No,
There's
there
only
is
the
not.
fold.
No, but there is folds and there's organic
Yes.
folds. So how things fold into each other, how they join, or how the texture moves from
Yeah.
seamlessly from one fold to another. That is what we study.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll do that next week.
Yeah.
We will be 1 week behind the rest of the classes, but I don't mind that because Jan, sometime later in the year, we will match up. So we don't have to worry about that too much. I'd rather do everything properly than to rush.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now if we the pewter, like the silver, we had done stainless steel, and if it was a pewter, like that color that they usually have for bells sometimes when they're
Yes.
dull.
Yes.
So it's just a question of not such a sharp highlight, right?
Depends, but see the
Okay.
picture. Sometimes
Right.
even in something like pewter, you might have
Mm.
you might not have too much of a dark shadow. So it
Okay.
might
Let me
be
just
a
see.
highlight and dull shadows rather than
Okay.
the other way
Oh,
around. So
I
go with the
see.
reference image, whatever you see in the reference image.
Okay. Pewter.
In the case,
Yeah. It's not a white highlight. It's a shadow.
yeah. So in case of dull materials, everything is dull. So if this is your range of highlight to dark shadows for shiny materials, the moment you make a dull material, the entire range crunches.
Okay.
So it can move from here to here. It can move from here to here. So lighter shadows.
I know lighter and darker.
And it can move
Right.
from here to here. So lighter highlights and still the same depth of shadows. So that
Right.
whole thing shifts throughout.
Yeah.
But the range is definitely smaller. Okay, so next week we will continue with fabrics and drapes. If you come across any more images, feel free to share. You can even search for images. We can do shiny textured fabric also if you want. Anything is fine.
Like you explained about pewter, I
Yeah.
mean, we could just discuss how you could do velvet, or it's very difficult
Yeah.
to do velvet. At least it looks very difficult.
It does
Or
look very
satin.
different. No,
Yeah. So,
just put those. Let's see. I can also do some research and
We
figure.
can do swatches, no? Different
We can do
materials.
swatches. Yeah. So
That-
or how to do
swatches.
burlap, jute, like you do. How
like
Yeah.
do
the
that? How to get
wooden
We
bow,
can
I
do
think you
small
said.
sections of
Yeah.
different fabrics. Yeah. Just
It'd be fun.
put them on the group
Yeah, I'll do that.
and put them as if you find something in a particular fabric, put the photograph of that and also find the detail of that fabric. Look for both. Because
Right.
the detail is used to study. We don't sketch everything that we see in the detail, but that will determine how our pencil moves or how the paint is applied.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess that's it then for today.
Thank you.
If you have
Thank you.
any more doubts or any more difficulties,
That's it.
please share them on the group so I can help you out. And
Yeah.
I'll see you next week then.
Yeah, I sent a picture. You can just
Let's
go
see.
through it and let me.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, nice. Looking good.
Thank you.
Very nice. Very shiny.
Very
really.
shiny.
And that's the main thing. Now you need to get it shiny.
Yeah,
Thank you.
correct. Okay, try
Very
some
nice.
more. Try some more. This is good fun.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye
See
everyone.
you.
Bye, all.
Bye-bye. Bye.